tell a little story about epilepsy and my journey through that, and how God came in to play a part in that, and bringing me back into the church through epilepsy. So to kick off the journey, I had my first tonic-clonic seizure in 2010 at work. For those of you who don't know, that's a grand mal seizure, and woke up in the hospital, and then in 2011, almost a year to the date, had another tonic-clonic, again at the office. Struggled through this journey a lot. Part of it got really difficult as the seizures began to break through. You deal with a lot of mental struggles, and what that means is the pharmaceuticals they put me on were no longer facilitating epileptic control. And we began to understand that I had progressive epilepsy. In 2023, in June, I had a series of clustered events that resulted in me having a full code or dying on ingression into the hospital. I was resuscitated. Then later that year in September, had another rinse and repeat incident, went through a heart surgery and heart ablation, and then we were enrolled in what's called a corrective surgery program for epilepsy. That's been a long program for about 2 years. So this past April, we spent 20 days in the hospital, 3 brain surgeries, still scarred up and see all the fun, a lot of sutures still in there. It was beautiful what Grace Point did for my family and for me. While I was in the hospital, I was in there for 20 days going through this, and it was a second home for my children, which was beautiful. And as I sat there in the bed, with all these monitors and probes and wires hooked up to my head, there's a couple of passages that really reflected to me. One is, Matthew 24. And this is when, Jesus is beginning his ministry, and he comes in, he says, the news about him spread throughout all Assyria, and they brought to him all those who were suffering with various diseases and pains, demonics, and this caught me, epileptics. So even when you go back in history, people have been struggling with epilepsy for a long time. And there's another passage that really meant a lot to me in my epilepsy journey, and this is in Corinthians 1:11. And it reflects the transition I went through, probably about year 6 in this journey, year 7 maybe. That was, when I was a child, I used to speak like a child, think like a child, reason like a child. When I became a man, I did away with childish things. For now we see in the mirror dimly, but then face to face. And now I know in part, but then I will know fully, just as I always also have been fully known. But now faith, hope, love, abide by these 3, but the greatest of these is love. Early in my life, I did a lot of security, a lot of boxing, and suffered some traumatic brain injuries resulting in this. And it changed my focus on life. And we've really leaned into the church through all of this, and it's been a major focus of our life now for the last probably year and a half. I started getting back in around 2007. But through this whole journey, it was those 2 passages I reflected on a lot, and it kind of gave me comfort in knowing if I didn't get through this piece, my wife and children had a good path to follow. So I was released from the hospital April 22nd of this year, and it was amazing walking back into the church like nothing had passed, and just an amazing period in our life. I know it was a struggle for my...
We did watch from the hospital.
Yeah, we did watch from the hospital, and a lot of the family struggled, and there were quite a few meetings. Pastor Bob was instrumental in my journey. We had a discussion before I went into the hospital, and I'd always looked at epilepsy as part of my atonement for my past life. And he refocused that, and that epilepsy was just part of a transition in my life, another journey, another path to take. And that meant a lot to me, to have that level of acceptance. And but watching my family come together on a shared path, it's been very important and beautiful to watch and see.
I always thought he was cute. maybe a little advanced for me, so we didn't go out. But we found each other later on in life, and he came into my life at a time when I had been going through a tremendous amount of pain and loss, and was a very, very broken person. And I guess in a lot of ways, he seemed very strong to me. And he was, and he is. But, he himself was broken too. He needed someone to love him. So it's been kind of a journey with the two of us. He started having seizures shortly into our relationship and was diagnosed with epilepsy. And I could never have imagined 12 years ago that we would be where we are right now with it, and that it could be as progressive and as dangerous as it's become over the past few years. And that's been very, very challenging for me as someone who, kind of has lifelong struggles with anxiety and depression and ADD, diagnosed later in life. And just in general, he's kind of been my safe place. And so, him being the one that needs to be taken care of is been a little bit of a challenge, because, he was kind of that for me.
After my second death and time in the hospital, I was removed out of my executive position and had to go back into consulting. And I was very depressed about that for a long time, and started really digging into the Bible and started really looking at Jacob. He's sitting there in the Old Testament looking at his entry into Israel saying, man, I can't do this. There's too many, and he did it anyway. And I reflect on those journeys and the past sermons on the seasons of David and all the different transitions people go to, and reflected back on my conversations in private with Pastor Bob, and realized this was just another season in my life, another transition to go through. But transitioning from a very independent kind of, alpha male, to use terminology of the day, and now the epilepsy as a gift. I spend so much more time at home as a consultant. I work predominantly out of what I call my new C-suite office, and that it's on the corner of the coffee table and the corner of the dining room. So I still have a corner office, and and it's a beautiful thing to have. But I get to see my daughters and my sons, and every day growing up. And
for years we had talked about, going back to church, getting back in church. We need to do this, but it seemed daunting, kind of thinking about looking at church shopping, and my social battery's kind of drained these days, as many things as I do. I'm really involved with my kids' school and various things, but he had a really bad seizure and a really bad episode afterwards, and we had been in the ER, and he came out and he said, I don't care where we go, pick a church, pick somewhere, let's go somewhere on Sunday. If it's not right, it's okay, let's just find somewhere and go. And we showed up at Grace Point. My husband, myself, my oldest daughter, and my two youngest daughters. And it was like, wow, we kind of liked that. And so then we went again the next week, and then the next week. And at this point, the kids were excited to start going. And my daughter, who has been, my oldest daughter, who, years back when I used to go to church, take her different places, she wasn't thrilled with everywhere, but she was wanting to come. And it just, I don't know, we were sitting through sermons, and Rob and I would look at each other sometimes like what they were talking about was talking about him, or talking about me, or talking about something we were going through. And maybe we were just, making it about us, I don't know, as we were listening to the message. But it was like, wow, a lot of things just really, really hit and hit and hit. And it was comforting, and we were laughing, and we were crying, and Pastor Bob, had brought that out in us, and it was like, wow, okay, this is where we belong, and he brought us here, and thank goodness he brought us here as the first place, because I really didn't have it in me to try out a lot of places. Anyway, through his epilepsy journey, someone who is a very, very anxious person and has panic attacks and has things to watch, some of the things he's gone through, including, watching your husband basically die in front of you a couple of times and dealing with that. And someone whose biggest fear really in life is loss. I've really struggled with that one with God, and it's been an ongoing thing all my life. But, it's something that's been revisited, in past years. But, one of the things in Romans 5, chapter 3 through 4, it says, "And not only that, but we also glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, and then character, and in character, hope." And I'm like, okay, I'm kind of going through the fire, but maybe, this is just one of those things that God is wanting me to learn and wanting me to work on and to be a better servant and to be a better mom, to be a better wife. There's another one from Galatians 6:9 that makes me think of it too, is let us not grow weary while doing good, for in some season we will reach a harvest if we do not lose heart. Perseverance, the overwhelmed and exhausted, although challenging, and dedication is not in vain. And so I've kind of leaned in both to coming to church, leaning into trying to pray and help that with my anxieties and things, and just be there as much as I can, supporting my husband, being the wife I feel like I should be. And it's been rough, but it's been beautiful to see, his faith and his comfort when, he's going through the things he's going through, and seeing that has been helpful.
I'm Addison, Rob and Andrea's daughter. We've been coming to Grace Point as a family since August of last year. And I had just started to kind of overcome some social anxiety and join a small group about a month before my dad went into the hospital. And I was just really overwhelmed by the support that I got from these wonderful people that I had met through this young adult small group at Grace Point. I was getting text messages and, well wishes, cards, and just made some new friends, and they got me out of the house and got me away and took my mind off things while my dad was going through all of these surgeries. And I don't know, I didn't expect that, especially since I was fairly new to the group, but it was just a wonderful feeling. And I'm very, very blessed to have met that group when I did. Shortly before my dad went into the hospital, my younger sister, Avi, she's 9, our dad had been having some issues one day, and she kind of quietly went into the kitchen and prayed to herself. And nobody really noticed that she was praying except for me, and I didn't say anything. I didn't draw any attention to it, but I took note of it. And shortly thereafter, it was just me and her, and we were riding in the car, and she was talking about Dad going into the hospital, and I got from what she had said that she didn't realize how long he was going to be in the hospital. And so I, gently told her, like, this is not going to be like his previous visits. It's going to be more lengthy, and Mom and Dad are probably going to be in the hospital for 2 to 3 weeks this time. And she got really quiet, and she kind of does that sometimes when she's processing. And I didn't want to push too much, but I did want to kind of delve further and talk to her about what she might be feeling. And I asked her if she was worried or afraid, and she shook her head. And so I was quiet for a minute, and then I was like, I saw you praying in the kitchen the other day to yourself. And she nodded, and I was like, is that why you're not afraid? And she smiled and she nodded and she said yes. She was like, I've been praying to God about Daddy, and I know that he is going to keep him safe and that Daddy's gonna be okay. And that just really hit me in my feels, especially since, you know, she didn't necessarily grow up in the earlier part of her life going to church, and that she's been leaning into her faith and learning more about God and what he does for us. And I just thought that was really special, and it kind of gave me a little bit more hope for our situation.
There was a specific night in the hospital. I mean, there was a few of them. We were in there 20, 21 nights, you know, and I stayed the whole time. I stayed the whole time with him in a very uncomfortable chair that had to be taken apart every time anybody came in the room and needed a chair. You know, I had to beg the hospital for multiple pillows to lay on it because there was bars and holes in it, and, you know, I'm not a spring chicken anymore. Anyway, probably could really use a good massage. But I have to really, you know, be grateful to just kind of how God has worked in our family, you know, because my daughter and my son, I have some adult children, stayed home with the younger ones and just made me not have to worry about what was going on at home. And what a blessing that was in our lives, for me to be able to be with him at the lowest points, because they had yanked him off of all of his meds, basically stripped him of hope, and basically tortured him for 3 weeks, 24 hours a day. And I would look at him often in the bed, and he looked like a little boy, like looking for his mom, like scared of the dark, you know. But to know that my other ones were home safe and loved by their siblings was just, I can't tell you how special that was to me. And my daughter continued to bring them to church and continued to come to young adults class through finding friends to watch them, and the way that they still wanted to and leaned into church while we were gone without us being like, get ready, let's go, was really beautiful. And the amount of outpouring from people, because, you know, we've kind of become a little bit more shut-ins as had been a little bit less able to get out and do things. You know, we used to go to the beach a lot. Now I really can't get in the water and swim. And so staying home a whole lot kind of keeps you away from people. But we had people just coming out of the woodwork, coming and bringing us cards and gift cards and meals and various things. And just to really see how many people loved us was humbling. And people that would say, you know, you have no idea how, you know, the wonderful things that, you know, you've done for us, and this is your turn, and we're here for you. And, you know, just see that, like, I just can't see that as anything but God working, you know, in our lives, and just love. And when I come to church here, and I feel that that's the kind of place that, you know, that we're seeing here. And, anyway, but sitting with Rob, you know, in the hospital, watching him go through the things he would go through, and when he would want to quit, he wanted to quit. He wanted to just be done with it. And at any point he could have, but if he did, then that would have meant, you know, this was his one shot really to get this kind of data that the doctors wanted. A lot of work went into it, 3 brain surgeries, hours and hours of that, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of everything. You know, this was kind of the shot. And if he gave up, then we were going to be giving up on, you know, getting further treatment. But being able to be there and hold his hand and pray with him through the night and do that, it's just, I just can't imagine how hard that was for him, but I know how hard it was for me, you know, as a woman watching him go through these things, and just how much harder it would have been had we not started really to turn towards God a few months before, you know, really lean into it like we had not before. And I really believe that that's, you know, what got us through, and I believe that God led us to be together years ago, and for me to be here for him through this. And
in the later years of my life, I've struggled with my faith myself. Not necessarily not believing, but just wondering why good people have to go through bad things sometimes. And going back to church and, hearing Pastor Bob talk about how, God doesn't want us to suffer, he's suffering with us. That's really kind of hit home with me. It's, life is hard for everyone in different ways. And it's just, it's somewhat comforting to know that even if I'm in a dark place, God's there with me, and he's with my family, and it's, it may not be the outcome that we want, but he's there with us, and things will be okay eventually. And I've started to see that, going to group and meeting some more people my age. I have a hard time socializing and meeting new people, and so making those new connections in the past few months has been a huge blessing. And having Pastor Bob and his wife Rhonda check on us while my parents were in the hospital was just really sweet. And just being able to lean into the church and the community and just meeting so many wonderful people and having them pray for us and check in on us has really been wonderful. And I'm just very thankful for that. My mom didn't leave my dad's side for the entire 3 weeks that he was in the hospital. So I was at home and kind of holding down the fort and taking the girls to and from school and taking them to friends' houses and making sure they got their homework done and doing dinners and stuff. And I found people to help me out when I wanted to go and get out of the house and do things for myself. But having all of that responsibility fall on me was a lot, but I also knew that it was taking some weight off of my parents' shoulders, knowing that they didn't have to worry about anything but themselves while my dad was going through his surgeries and dealing with all that in the hospital. I'm happy that I could do that for them and, be someone that they could count on in, one of these harder parts of this epilepsy journey that my dad's been going through. I love my family, and I would really do anything for them. And it means a lot that I could be there for them and help how I could.
And on the celebratory side, we did finally get approval after 2 years of this journey to get what's called a medical device from a company called NeuroPace. It's a RNS. It's basically a pacemaker for the brain. And we identified the exact cause of my epilepsy, and we don't have a curative path now, but we have what's called a palliative pathway that should help me get back into control and regain some of my freedoms. And now we're in a transitionary stage in our life as we complete that part of the journey. And as a lot of time as an epileptic, when the paramedics show up and your first ingress, they think you're having a drug overdose, or they want to give you Narcan and all these things. And
Argue with your wife.
Yeah, and argue with your wife and all that fun. And the beauty of that as I go through is you feel the judgment, and you feel the exile and all that comes with that. And you start to focus on the loss. And through Grace Point and really digging into some of those verses in Matthew and Corinthians that I shared with you, I started thinking about the circumstances those verses were written in. And you look at Corinthians, Paul sitting in a Roman prison still giving out that love is the most powerful of all the things that we possess, and watching my family come through and friends I haven't seen in a long time, and just a rallying of support and love and outpouring of support for myself. It's just been amazing to see the family unite and bond and come together, and old relationships and past things healed, and just a refocusing on the spiritual components of all of our lives. And my children now are all fully leaning in to Jesus, and that's another reason why I still call epilepsy a gift. I wasn't raised in the church, and now my entire family is being raised in the church, and yeah, it's been a beautiful transition.